Morning, everyone. We'll begin in about 1 minute time. So just getting the stream all set up. Looks like we're ready to go there. So give it about 1 more minute. No tech issues today. No tech issues. Everything's working for now. So. Morning. How you doing this morning? It's good to see you. We're back. Oh, wow. I think that was amazing. Oh. Really?
Yeah, hard.
That's really cool.
Still trying to get my sleep back in the world.
Oh.
Still waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Are you sure it's just a bit?
Oh no. But we're gonna skitter over a few thousand years of history, but we're gonna do it in less than an hour. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing this morning? Excellent. So, for those of you online, welcome. So today, first of all, thank you so much, Michael. He asked me to come in and speak this morning, so I was very pleased to do so. So, Michael, thank you for the opportunity. And so today, before we, I guess, go any farther, has anybody heard anything in the news? I know. All right. So there's been a bit going on this week. So we're going to cover it, but today we'll take a little step back. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for today and for the opportunity to serve you one more day. Lord, as we come to you this morning, as we spend a little time in your word and studying your people over history, God, we pray that you would continue to God, that your will would be done. We thank you, Lord, for all that you do, but Lord, more importantly, all that you are. In your name, Jesus. Amen. All right. So as we open up today, what we're really going to do is I'd like to take a look. Everybody knows Israel, what's going on in Palestine right now. There's a ton. It's changing moment by moment. I actually waited till this morning to put in the news just because you never know. I mean, if we go back a week and a half ago, we thought things were pretty wild then. Now it's almost a step back. And what I'd like to do here is because we know a little bit about Israel, yes, and Palestine, but we're going to take kind of a historic has changed and over thousands of years. But before we do that, let's go ahead. We'll jump in. This article I'm in the wrong screen. There we go. No, that's the wrong one too. But at least I'm consistent. All right. So as of now, and by now, not right now, this is as of about 2 hours ago. So things could change. So as we go here, I'm going to read, sorry, this is, I tried not to do it, but there's a number of word walls. This was a bigger article. There's a couple of sentences that really jumped out in this article to me that I think it's important to pay attention to. So this came out as of, I believe it was last night. So it's National Security Head. By the way, I'm going to butcher a ton of names, but I'm not going to keep butchering the names to just people. It's going to cover countries, periods of times. It's going to be a lot of stumbling and bumbling. Sorry, I'm not a scholar, and I'm too old to go back to learn to be one. So we're just going to stumble and bumble through it. The National Security Head, Zachi Hanigby, said on Saturday that there is no active negotiation efforts underway by Israel to repatriate the Israelis and some other foreign nationals kidnapped by Hamas last Saturday, saying there is no way right now to have a negotiation with the terror organization. There are thought to be 150 to 200 hostages being held in Gaza terror groups. Hanigby also stated that the cabinet's war goal is to remove the Hamas terror group from the military and political control over the Gaza Strip, but declined to elaborate on planned next steps for the coastal enclave. And he acknowledged that the state of Israel did not fulfill its mission to protect its citizens from the devastating Hamas onslaught, in which some 1,500 to 2,000 Hamas gunmen poured into Israel, having blown up sections of the border fence and massacred over 1,300 Israelis, most of them civilians, at 22 communities and about a dozen IDF bases and posts. He said, "I was wrong, and so were others, to have assessed that Hamas was detoured, confirming that some 150 to 200 hostages, the vast majority of them Israeli, are being held in the Gaza Strip." Hanigby said that the government, 8 days after their capture, still does not know who they all are and their status. He said that the government's liaison for hostages Gal Hirsch updates Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu a few times a day. Told you there was a lot of words. The government and its representative Hirsch have come under fire from hostages' families for not sharing information or even initiating contact with them. Hirsch said Friday that he had set up a team to liaise with the families, and on Saturday said that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will meet with them. We're trying to get everyone home, said Hirsch. We've been to dozens of homes. I want to hug people personally. The spokesman of the families of missing Israelis feared held captive in Gaza slammed the government for essentially abandoning the hostages after Henegby's statements. Ronan Zur, the head of the family's headquarters, said at a press conference in Tel Aviv that the families are awaiting an explanation of Henegby's statement. IDF spokesman Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari said Saturday night that the military has so far notified the families of 126 hostages that their loved ones are being held in the Gaza Strip. Hamas and the Islamic Jihad claim to be holding 130 hostages, with some reports estimating the number as at least 200. Hamas has also said that any prisoner swap negotiations will only take place after the end of the fighting. Hamas's October 7th surprise assault against Israel largely against civilian targets is the most devastating terror attack in Israel's 75-year history and the bloodiest massacre of the Jews since the Holocaust. Netanyahu declared war the same day. Pounding targets in Gaza Strip for the past 8 days, Israel has said it will not hold back against Hamas, even at the cost of harming kidnapped Israelis. That's important. Hamas has claimed several captives have been killed in the Israeli strikes. Israel has largely dismissed them as Hamas propaganda. When asked by the Times of Israel at the briefing about Israel plans for alternative control or return to Israeli control of the Gaza Strip, Henegby says, "We can't report through you to the enemy on what's coming. We can tell you Hamas that is prohibited for it to be sovereign in Gaza." Henegby added that in the recent cabinet meeting, the government approved a plan to destroy Hamas, as the Prime Minister and Defense Minister declared. Hamas will not be the ruler, the sovereign in Gaza after the war, he said. Also important. In response to the question about government's responsibility for failing to thwart Hamas and to protect Israel's citizens, Henegby says, "I greatly identify with what the Chief of Staff said," referencing IDF Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi's Thursday statement, "And the military failed in its mandate to protect citizens. We did not fulfill our mission. Nobody can dispute that the state of Israel did not fulfill its mission," Henegby said. Reminded that he said in an interview a week before the onslaught that Hamas hadn't initiated fire from Gaza for 2 years, that it was deterred for the next 15 years and was not seeking escalation, Henegby said, "First of all, that was my mistake, and it reflects the mistake of all those who carry out the assessments over many years, but especially recently. We believe that Hamas had learned the lessons of 2021's Operation Guardian of the Walls when it sustained a heavy blow." Last one. Henegby said that security forces received an indication hours before the Hamas onslaught began, but that the IDF and the Shin Bet believed that it was nothing close to what we suffered. Responding to concerns that Hezbollah might open up a full-scale northern front in Israel's ongoing war, Henegby said that Israel has passed messages to discourage the terror group from joining their fellow Iran-backed proxy in war against Israel. "Our goal is to not be pulled into a two-front war," Henegby said. "We think Hezbollah won't invite the destruction of Lebanon because it won't be less than that if there is war there," Henegby said. Super important. Israel said Israel's traded fire with Hezbollah and allied Palestinian factions in Lebanon several times in recent days, although tit-for-tat attacks have remained limited in scope. At least 4 Israeli soldiers and 3 Hezbollah terrorists and 5 Palestinian terrorists have been killed in the exchanges. This is from the Times of Israel, written by Carrie Keller-Lynn. So if you picked up, there was a couple of one-liners that were stated there. There's not going to be Hamas said there's no negotiation until the fighting stops. Israel said the fighting's not going to stop, and as of this morning, they were staged outside of Gaza to go in. And we're going to take a look at the map and so what all of this means, and you can see what this really looks like. And we're talking about a very small piece of land, but Israel said we're going in, and not only that, has let Hezbollah know from here, at least what they're telling them, if you come in and fight, we will go to war with you, and it would be a shame for this to happen in Lebanon too. So it's escalated. It's tense. It's pretty tense over there. So definitely would keep keep praying for everyone over there. So it is a time of escalation. We don't know. Israel did give 24 hours notice that said that they demanded that essentially Gaza, everybody leave Gaza. So they're coming in, hitting buildings. Hamas, as we know, does use human shields. So they've taken hostages. They're going to use them. But it does look like Israel's going to go in. And at Hezbollah, at least right now, they're kind of doing a couple rockets fired here, a couple shots fired back, but that has not escalated at that point, but may change. So we've also, I believe, well, I don't believe, we've got a second carrier group that is either there currently or on the way. If you know anything about the U.S. military, they usually don't put two carrier groups next to each other unless they're bringing somebody into port or doing that. So the fact that they're both in the region, that's like each carrier group is like an army. Well, it's a navy, but they've got incredible capacity. So it's not just one carrier. There's a ton of support ships, and the fact that there's two of them there, things could escalate quickly. We'll pray that they do not. Has anybody else read anything? Anybody else have any comments, please?
They let supposedly 24 hours to let the people out, but they wouldn't let them out.
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't let them out.
Mm-hmm.
Hamas is blocking it, yeah. Right.
Yes, they said that they've given them. Israel has given them 24 hours to vacate. They said now Hamas is not. Of course, Hamas is saying Israel's not. There's a ton of news everywhere, and depending on where you get it, it's saying, yeah. So it's that, but the people cannot get out. And you're talking, I believe it's about 1.1 million people. They're still there.
Well,
Link,
they're
please.
starting from the northern part, the
Mm-hmm.
northern part of Gaza.
Yep.
So that's where they're going to clear it out, and that's why they want the people to go south and
Right.
get out of the way.
Yep. Great point, Elaine. So looking at their staging on the north end of Gaza for those online, and then going to be moving south. So they're not recommending, demanding that everybody leave through the south. Anybody else? Any thoughts? Anybody else heard anything? Please.
Just an observation, which may be quite obvious. So sorry. That the evil, the one thing I'm thankful for is that the evil is on display. The mask is off, and people who have just sort of let this go or been
Mm-hmm.
on the wrong side, some people that were misled are switching to the side of Israel,
Mm-hmm.
which has not happened in a long time, and I am grateful for that.
You're talking about nations?
Nations and
Yep.
individuals, politicians, press, media,
Mm-hmm.
I'm thankful for that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So.
The disappointing thing is that here in the United States, we have so many people that are rallying for the Palestine, for the Palestinians, and I think we need to, as hopefully more informed people, be able to tell them exactly that these Palestinians are Arabs, number
Mm-hmm.
one. They're not they were never Palestinians before. They were Arabs that came into the area and inhabited that area. But that's number one. And number two,
Yeah, tag team going on here. So it's.
and number two, that it was the first people that called Israel, any part of Israel, Palestine, were the Romans.
You're skipping ahead. That's awesome. Yes. No, please. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and the second one was at the end of World War II, the British.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it's always been Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been and we have to be able to tell people that who are these Palestinian supporters, that the usurpers are really the Arabs who came in.
And well, the other thing is that Israelis have been there throughout the whole time.
Yes.
At least a remnant of them, not
Mm-hmm.
maybe as many as now, but through. I know you said you were going to talk about the history, but the millennia. I mean, Israelis have been there. Jews have been there. Let's put it that way. Jews have been there, and so the whole idea of the Palestinians. The other thing that I just add is that it's really sad to see how these supposedly great universities have allowed the dissent on this. I mean, the whole, what was there, 20 or 30 groups at Harvard or something
Mm-hmm.
like that? I mean, our universities are just, I don't understand how it got to be so bad. It is.
Yes. Yep. Please.
Well, and it's just also an observation. I know that Michael had talked last happens next week, and they're going to make, no matter who you're watching on the news, yeah, that it's going to be Israel is the bad guy,
Mm-hmm.
and the Palestinians are going to be like, oh, like this. And I heard somebody on, what was it? Oh, BBC saying that Israel's attack or their counterattack was inhumanitarian. And I thought to myself, well, then what is Hamas doing? Something that's humanitarian? I mean,
Right,
Right.
it doesn't make
it's,
sense.
yeah. So it's just interesting watching what Michael had said last week.
Yes.
Also, in the Bible, God has promised Abraham that this land would be his.
Mm-hmm.
And there's someplace else in the Bible, and I can't remember where exactly, but it also said, God also told them that once Israel is established as a nation again, it will never not be a country, country.
Yes.
So it's established now again, and so God is going to protect it no matter what. And
Mm-hmm.
mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed. And yeah, yeah. You find yourself fighting God. And there's on the talking about universities. Did you see the response from a number of large companies on Wall Street?
Yes,
Yeah. So they blacklisted anyone who's a member of those clubs at Harvard. They said you'll never work on Wall Street at this company. So okay.
Good message.
No, there's but yeah, Mary, to your point, the mask is off, and people are openly saying it. So it is. That's please.
Forgive my ignorance, but we also have to, or I assume we have to separate the two, right? Palestinian people and Hamas,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
12.2 million people do not all hate Israel.
Right.
They're trying to kill them. If they did, they would just do it, right? We have
Right.
a huge army of people, and so it's, when you're talking about having conversations with people, I think it's best to use the word Hamas versus Palestine, right, or Palestinians.
Correct. That's a great point as far as Hamas being the party that controls the Palestinian government, separate from the people of Palestine. So the same way here that a political party does not represent the whole of its people. So it is the same there. Please, I saw another hand.
The problem,
Oh,
with what you're saying, though, in my the way I see it, they're raising their kids from birth to hate Israel. So how do we know? I mean, if you're raised in that, you're indoctrinated in that. They're talking about who's going to take these refugees. I don't want them here. I mean, I know you got to separate Hamas from the people, but it's so intertwined.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's definitely difficult, but you can't do it, right? I mean, that would be like saying, that because we have, white supremacists in the United States, that all the United States is white supremacist, right?
Yeah, but I mean, it's from what I've seen, they have the cartoons, they have their schooling.
Right.
It's just woven into their daily lives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a good point as far as a lot of the children are taught, educated from a very young age to hate Jews. And we don't know. So what happens to these people afterwards? Where do they go? And then what does life look like after them? Because or after this. So if you're 5 or 6 years old and you end up leaving, you're an orphan. How are you then raised? Where do you get raised? So those are all questions in the humanitarian effort that I'm sure will take place in the coming weeks, hopefully days, but probably weeks or months. That those big questions will have to be answered.
To his point, and I agree, that you have to separate it out. I mean, the white supremacy, if you think about America, up until the 50s probably, um, people taught their kids to hate the blacks. That was the
Mm-hmm.
same basic idea. You're teaching one group to hate another group, and it was taught generation after generation after generation. And how do you get to that? I mean, it takes a long time to get away from that. We're not completely away from that today.
Mm-hmm.
We still have people that are very racist and still teach their kids to do that. And until we stop that,
Right.
it's always going to be there.
Yeah.
I think that's
That's
break the cycle. And to your point about where they're going to go, as terrible as it sounds, is if you did have some sort of way of, the whatever orphanages or whatever, these kids who have been indoctrinated to reprogram them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Don't hate, love. Not everybody that's here can kill you. They're
Yeah.
not evil. They're just people like you.
Mm-hmm.
That's an opportunity. It's awful as it sounds,
Yep.
opportunity, right?
Yeah, and it's to think differently, and that's a very challenging effort. I mean, there was a great discussion here in class for those of you online about the way that we think about race in the United States. Where were we at in the up until about 1950s? How has our society changed? How do we look at race? Hate's not unique to any color, creed, people group. That's something that we have pretty commonly. But how do we then work to not have that anymore, to start to grind that out? Unfortunately, in the human condition, ooh, we're all flawed, really bad people. It's like, I think, by and large, that people are good. I would say you're wrong. There's nothing good within us but God. So that's the time I think that is really, really we connect to those types of values. Then it's something deeper that takes place. It's that change in the heart. Please.
I was just going to say that the yes, but you have to separate them. Hamas, though, is a religion-based group. So
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you hear what did they announce as they were running through the open wire on the fence walls? Those walls. Allah Akbar.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a religion
Mm-hmm.
that's being, and it's hard to change. So we have to do that on a spiritual level, really, to change people. And they haven't let Christians in there, and so
Mm-hmm.
that's the only way it's going to really make any kind of a difference.
Yeah, and that's a great one as far as with that. But in Islam being theocratic in nature, whereas we separate church and state, if you will, so they operate independently of one another, and hopefully the values of one should transfer over to the other. And by that I mean the church to the government.
Yeah.
So that's clear. All right, so we're good there. But in Islam or Islamic nations, probably that becomes Sharia, then would become the way that it's ruled, because they look at it as, okay, there's God, Allah, and that everything else stems from there. So the way you govern, the way that you live, all of those things are interconnected. Whereas with us, we do think about it differently. So that will be a challenge. Anything else before we jump in, please?
Well, the totally underlying situation is something that I don't think will ever be resolved, because the whole issue of birthright with Ishmael and Isaac is still in play.
Mm-hmm.
They the Arabs still believe that they have the birthright to the land.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing that can fix that.
That's a great point. Let me jump online here real quick. Yeah, so great conversation there about as far as the connection to Islam, believing descended from Ishmael, so Abraham's first son, and then whereas the Jews then come from Isaac, so both are claiming they're going back to Abraham. Please.
That's why if I noticed several years ago that, or maybe last year, that God in the Bible always lists his promises, his covenant to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Okay, yes, Abraham had other sons, other wives,
Mm-hmm.
and Isaac also had somebody else, I think. But anyway, um, the main point is that it's through, if you go all the way through Abraham, Isaac, and Joseph. If you go through Joseph, then it's the 12 tribes. Jacob, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Jacob. It's the 12 tribes. And nobody else.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's who the covenant is through.
Mm-hmm.
It's not through Ishmael.
Ishmael.
It's not through Esau.
Mm-hmm.
It's through Joseph. Jacob.
Yep, and that's it, where the covenant, as God was saying, had established the covenant through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So
And he says it many times.
mm-hmm, says it over and over again. And it's every time it's cited, the God of our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So that's
extremely important.
yes, very, very important. I love that. Anything else, or would we like to? Do you want to jump in and we'll kind of go through a brief history? And by the way, this is all right. So we're going to do this. Once again, we're going to kind of go through here, and this is intended to be not a deep dive, because as we talk, I was born and raised in Phoenix, Arizona. Well, Gilbert, Arizona. By the way, Gilbert back then had one traffic light. It's a little different now. So I'm going to, okay, so it wasn't, but I was raised here. So for me, Arizona became a state in 1912. Old to me is like 50 years. When I'm looking, you find something out here, you're like, oh yeah, this building's been around 50 years. It's old. Then we go back east to like DC, or you go up in the Northeast in the United States. You're like, oh wow, yeah, 50 years, there's nothing. Now you're seeing things. I had the opportunity as a young man. My parents took us. My dad was a history teacher. That's my love for history. And so my parents would take us. And so I got a chance to go to, various Civil War battlegrounds, things like that. And you could still find pieces of lead that had been laying there for, 100 and some years. And we're like, wow, that's really cool. And it's like, that's old. No. Now, as we start to go into this land, hundreds of years, it's a blink. So this is what we're going to do. Once again, we're going to kind of skitter over the top, and I don't mean to treat it lightly, but it's just that you can take any 100-year period of the thousands of years that we're going to be discussing and not be able to learn everything through multiple grad degrees, much less in about 40 minutes. So that we're going to have to treat it lightly. But what it's intended to do is just provide context, because I know when I was in school, we didn't study about Israel a lot at all. There was the Middle East, but all we knew back then, I grew up during the Cold War. So if you're online and you're young, you should go research about that. That was fun. But we didn't talk about that. The Middle East was always going to be the next thing. But then in about 30 minutes later, we were going to hit with nuclear missiles. So that was kind of how we grew up. Then after that, all right, great. But we didn't learn a whole lot about that. This is going to go back, and we're just going to kind of not deep dive it, but just take a look at kind of who's owned the land over time. So if the Bible is true, and if it is accurate, that's where we're going to start. And by if, I'm posing it as I interpret it as such. So we're going to start there. We don't have to go back to Adam and Eve. That's pretty easy, which is great. We can jump down a few generations, and we're going to start at Noah. Why is this important? Because if it was not a regional flood, it was a worldwide cataclysmic flood. That means that there was 8 people that walked off the ark. So we can trace it. Let's go back to there. We'll start there. Now, the land known as Israel, as we know now as Israel, was established by Canaan, who is the grandson of Noah. In Genesis 10:6, it says, the sons of Ham were Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. The sons of Cush were Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Ramah, Sabtecha, and the sons of Ramah were Sheba and Dedan. So as we start to look at some of the ancient people groups, we go back to these 8 folks that were Noah, and then we had Ham. Come on, Brian. Japheth. Shem. Thank you. So Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Should have put that one in there too. And then from them, we have all of these people groups that come out. Now, it's called the land of Canaan because Canaan, the grandson of Noah, that's the area that he went to. So land of Canaan, pretty simply put, it's where Canaan moved to. How do the Jews come to be? So how do they get to the land? This was done. God told Joshua after Moses' death to enter the promised land. And we go Joshua 1:1 through 9. It says, after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, it came to pass that the Lord spoke to Joshua the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, saying, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now, therefore, arise, go over this Jordan, you and all the people of the land I am giving to them, the children of Israel. So he's saying he's giving them the land. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon I have given you, as I said to Moses, from the wilderness and this Lebanon as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites and of the great sea to going down of the sun shall be your territory. No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and of good courage, for to this people you shall divide as an inheritance the land which I swore to their fathers to give to them. Only be strong and very courageous, that you may observe to do everything of all the law which Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right hand nor to the left, that you may prosper wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, that you may observe and do according to what is written. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and of good courage. Do not be afraid. Do not be dismayed. For the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. So God is now telling Joshua, go into the land, cross the river, and take what I have promised. This is back in around 1400 BC. So Joshua then, as we know, they march in, and that's where they go against, let's see, Ai was one of the cities. Some of those stories that we heard about when we were kids was during this time of the time of the Jews. So they march in. Now, this is the area we're talking about. It's not even as big as New Jersey. So it's a pretty small place. Then, of course, it was a lot more difficult. You're on foot, maybe horseback, but by and large, moving across it pretty slow. But it's not a big area. We can see here Israel in the center. And if you go down where the Gaza Strip is right now is Philistia. So the Philistines. This is where they would fight out of Israel's historical enemies. That's going to be important later. You've got Judah, there's Moab, Edom, Ammon, Aram, Phoenicia. So this is the area really that we're talking about now, just for a little historical context. And I found this image. This is kind of a fun one to walk through, at least I found. So what we have is Israel goes in, and now they control the land starting at about 1400 BC. Now, we're going to look at a timeline of Israel. I just found this to be fun. But I thought it important to call out ahead of time because this picks it up in about 1000 BC. That's when King Solomon starts to build the temple. So the Israelites come in. The Babylonians are, before I jump in there, we can see Israel's there. They set up and they build the first temple. This now is their place. They're not a nomadic people anymore. They're a people group that is established in a land. Now, as we start to move from the top, we're going to move our way this way. The Babylonians come in. The Babylonians come in and they take possession of the land. They conquer it. So now Israel, or then Judah, is a state of the Babylons, but really not a state. What they say is, we're going to control all of it. Boom. Bunch of people go out the exile. The temple is destroyed in 586 BC. This is Solomon's temple. So they smashed it to pieces. The Babylonians now control the land. So Babylon has it. They're, what I like too, these little the squares where it says ancient Israel, just to the right of that, you can see what religion the people are that possess the land. So at first, now we have the Jews. Next, polytheists. The Babylonians had many gods. So they now possess the land until about 539 BC. At that point in time, the Persians come in. And this is with the Persians come in, they conquer the Babylonians, and the second temple is started by Cyrus the Great. This was one that was prophesied by name, said Cyrus, you will do this and you will establish a temple. In his first year of rule, Cyrus the Great of the Persians started construction, had this construction started on the second temple. So they go through and said, commission you, go build this. And he said, great. So they go in and start building the temple. Well, they're under Persian rule. And once again, the Jews have always, as we know them, the Jews now, they have still been in the land for all of this time. For these, now we're at, where are we at? About 332 BC. That's about 1,000 years that they've stayed in the same area. So we have the Persians. They come in. Then we have the Hellenistic era. This is when the Greeks came through. The Greeks come in. We've got Philip of Macedon, who was the father to Alexander. They come through and they look and say, hey, that land looks really great. I'd like to stay there too. So they come mowing through. They conquer the Persians. They take possession of the land. Then it becomes Hellenistic. Worship of the Jewish worship, banned. So you can't do that. Even they were polytheists. Nope. So the Jews were not allowed to worship as they desired during the whole Hellenistic period. Now, as that starts to break up and it starts to lose power, then we come to an interesting area called the Hasmonean dynasty. Probably butchering that name if you can say it correctly. This is where Israel was really, well, now as we know Israel, the Jews were able to practice openly. They had battles. They fought off the Greeks. And for about 80 years, they became autonomous. If not mostly, they became autonomous. We're like, yes, we can do this. Now, of course, they had neighbors around them. Everybody had neighbors around them that thought almost in a zero-sum way where the more that you could take from one, you get bigger in your dynasty by taking somebody else's. So with each of these so far, we have anytime you see a line there, it's a conquering. I'll go ahead and give it, they conquered them. So the Babylonians did not just say, hey, Israel, can we have your land? And they were like, sure. And they gave it to them. Conquered. Come to the Hasmonean dynasty. They're about 80 years there. And then what do we find? The Romans. Then the Romans come in. The Romans come in, and then they take over. And this is where we find in about 167 BC that the Romans take control of it. And this is where it is now, and I'll click to my next slide. We'll go up to the top. There's Jesus, by the way. Comes in. That's the time of Jesus right there. And the Romans destroy the Second Temple in 70 AD. So from that whole time, the Romans are in control. They take it over. There's a great revolt, what's called the Great Revolt, where Israel revolts. That's called Judea, the province of Judea. They revolt. They're like, okay, we're going to fight for freedom. They lost. Well, the Romans, they do take that fairly personally. So they came down, killed and crucified a bunch of people, and just razed the temple to the ground, smashed it to pieces. That's over. So the Second Temple, and it has not been rebuilt since 70 AD. That's destroyed. Rome is still in control, keep a pretty heavy foot on it all the way through. And then there was something that was, I think, important to call out, that was a massive persecution. They had the Jews, they got together, and it's what's called the, I'm going to kill this name, Bar Kokhba rebellion. And it was named at, so they go through and they rebel, and they're going to do it, and they're going to break away. And they didn't. There was about 4 separate small time periods in there. So it's about 132 to 136. During this time period, the Jews are fighting. Hey, we're going to get free of Rome. We're going to overthrow them. They didn't. Rome took it really, really personal. They came through and just started massacring. Genocide would be the word that we use today. And razing whole villages. So they would come through, flatten villages, kill people en masse. So it was just, we're going to do this now so that for hundreds of years you remember that you never raise up against us. And it was just a brutal, brutal time in history. The Jews still refer back to those. There's names that they have, and they're horrible. When you read about the time where people went in and they would just trap them and then slaughter everybody wholesale. So that's the time the Bar Kokhba rebellion. That was in about 136. A lot of Jews went into exile and fled. There was still a remnant that remained in the land. Then we have toward the end of the Roman Empire. So as we get up closer to the top there, a really important date. There was a 324. This is where Constantine becomes emperor of Rome. Why is that important? Because Romans, as we know, they used to crucify Christians. There was many, many persecutions of Christians, but Constantine became a Christian. Once he became a Christian, he legalized it as a religion within Rome. And not only that, it was openly practiced because the boss is doing it. So that became a religion. Then it was, so Christians could then practice openly. That is really, really important because as we transition, Rome becomes so big and becomes so unwieldy that in time it breaks up into two. He also moves the capital from Rome to Constantinople. So moves it across, that then becomes the capital of Rome. Rome then in time splits, and we've got the Eastern Roman Empire and the Western Roman Empire. Eastern Roman Empire we then know as the Byzantines. So the Byzantine period that we have, that's Christian rule. So that they said, okay, Rome, we're going to kind of break it up. We'll just go East Coast, West Coast, boom, split up. That becomes the Byzantine area. And the Byzantines, so that they didn't have to conquer the Romans because they were still kind of the Romans. It was just half the Romans. Other than that, so far, fighting, transition. The Byzantines have it. Then we have another AD is, we'll call it the founding of Islam. So as they know, the Prophet then Muhammad established the religion of Islam, and that comes to prominence in the region. So we can see then in about less than 30 years later, he's able to assemble, Muhammad is able to assemble a massive army, and they start going through the region and overtake what's modern day Israel now. So they were Arabs, the religion comes to prominence, a whole bunch of people sign on, and then the army, they go through. And so now it's known as the Arab Caliphate. And this is the caliphate is under Muslim rule, and they control the land. There's still Jews living in the area. but it is now controlled and will be so for the next number of years. By number of years. Then we can get into the Crusader era. This is where we get all those movies where with the Crusaders, Robin Hood, kind of that. Hey, they go over and they're going to go fight Islam and take control of the Holy Land. It bounces Christian. Most of it was controlled of Islam or the various people groups that are there. So it was back and forth, fighting for hundreds of years through. Then we have the Mamelukes, warriors. These were ones that were, kids that were taken in, were raised as soldiers, incredible horseback fighters. So as the Mamelukes, they were known, and they were the ones considered champions of Islam. They drove out the Mongols. So the Mongols, Peter the Great comes in there. You got the who's who comes through that part of the world for 1,000 years. The Mamelukes come in. The Mongols are there for a bit. The Mamelukes drive the Mongols out of the Middle East. That's important because if you ever look at Genghis Khan and the Mongols and a good portion of Europe, all the way down in, and they would come in and they fought differently. They changed warfare as far as when you hear what's the word I was thinking about today? Oh, yes. Has anybody heard the word unprecedented lately? We're going to cross some boundaries on this one, so it's fun. But with unprecedented, there was one. Has anybody heard of the Khwarezm? I'm butchering that name. People. Right. So what happened was, at this point in time, should you, but it is worthy of study, where it was a massive people group. It controlled a portion of the Middle East. They insulted Genghis Khan twice. And it was the second time that his response was he sent 100,000 horsemen down there, and he wiped out a nation. Genghis Khan was responsible for killing about 10% of the planet while he was alive. He also repopulated a large part of the planet while he was alive. So interesting fellow, worthy of study, but that whole people group went through and they razed every town that they came to for decades. And that was their mandate, to go down there and kill everything that was living. That's how warfare was incredibly, incredibly brutal. I won't even describe what happened in the last fight because it's that bad. If you want to know, see me after class. So we get through the Mamelukes. The Mamelukes then, incredible horse warriors. They own the land, Muslim. Then the rise of the Turks. So the Ottoman Turks come up. The Mamelukes start to weaken. The Turks take over. They control the whole zone. The Turkish Empire was also massive. And over the next 100 years, the Turkish Empire was the who's who. I shouldn't say who's who. Controlled a ton, including Israel. Now, what was the transition? So we've gone all the way from pre-14. Now we're getting into the end of the Turkish rule was 1917. Actually, I can tell you the date. November 11th, 1918. November 11th, 1918 was Armistice Day. It was the ending of World War I. Why? The Ottoman Empire controlled Israel, what's modern-day Israel at that point in time. They partnered the Ottoman Empire. It was Germany, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire fought, if you will, from the United States, the UK, on the other side of World War I. At the end, at Armistice Day, the British then are given response and how they are going to distribute it. The reason they said this land that used to be yours now belongs to us. Sign here, you're done. England now has control of it. What do they do with it? I'm glad you asked. We're here because, as we talked about earlier and said earlier, it's been around a long time, and the Jews have always had a part of it. Ooh, and I did forget something key. Lane, you hit it earlier, which was at the Bar Kokhba rebellion that took place. Rome came in and really, really devastated the Jewish people. One of the last things that they did for them was that the Roman Empire then called them, they renamed them Syria Palestinia. So just as a spit in the face, what they said was, hey, not only that, we killed as many of you as we chose to. We tore up all of your villages, raised as many buildings as we chose to. Hey, remember how you hate the Philistines? That's your name. And then they left it there. So the name Palestine is derived from Syria Philistinia, which means Philistine. So as a way of saying the people group they hate, yes, please.
Also, they wiped out the name Judea, so that's why
Yes, they did not want the name Judea to survive, so they tried to wipe that name out and replace it with Philistine. So that was just, where does it come from? The Romans. Questions?